Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL, my little podcast about English language teaching and other teachy stuff too. Credit and honourable mentions will be given during the episode or in the show notes. Let's crack on. Hi, how are you? If you're new, you are most welcome. If you're not new, if you're one of my old, trusted, valued listeners, welcome back. So today, guys, I would like you to grab a cup of tea and a biscuit because I'm going to start with a little story. Okay, here we go. So a while ago, I was teaching a B2 class and the word ivory came up. Now, I put a picture on the screen of an elephant and I said, where does ivory come from? And the answer was elephants. Fine. So to me, that was clear enough. I answered the question concerning ivory. But then later on in the lesson, another student said, I don't know what ivory means. Have you been in this position before where you thought you'd explain something clearly and then it just comes back to bite you in the bum? I'm sure everybody has. So anyway, this little story shows two things. One, students don't always tell you at the time when they don't understand. And two, I should have done a more thorough job of checking students' concepts of ivory. So the question is, how do you introduce or explain any vocabulary that comes up in class? A translation? Do you show a picture? Do you give an English definition? Or do you use CCQs? What are they, I hear you cry? These are concept checking questions. I'll get to that in a minute, but raise your hands if you don't go a little deeper into the vocabulary and ask some questions to check if all students understand it. Some of you have your hand up. How do I know? Because you're human. You make mistakes. Look, sometimes there's no need, okay? For a dog, okay, you need a picture. But a lot of the time when the concepts are slightly more complicated, there most definitely is some need for more than a picture. So don't you think that making as many connections to that concept as possible makes sense? Okay, I want you to indulge me here, okay? I don't know a lot about the brain. I am no expert, but just bear with me here, okay? The brain uses lots of different parts of itself to acquire language. I need to do a bit more research on that. But as far as I understand it, the neocortex has been shown to play an influential role in many functions. Now, for the purposes of this episode, we're going to just stick to the memory and learning processes part of it, okay? So some complex language processing goes on in the neocortex. Conscious thought, episodic memory, which is events, social and emotional processing, semantic memories, which is your long-term memory that processes ideas and concepts that are not drawn from personal experience. So it could be like common knowledge or just sort of things you learn, like the sun rises in the east. And this knowledge is accumulated throughout our lives. Now, naturally, this intertwines with our experiences, and in some ways, this knowledge we pick up can be dependent on or influenced by culture, which I find very interesting. Just think, for example, some cultures might perceive time very differently from you, or formality or informality. Why is all this important? Maybe it isn't. I'm just working off my own little theory here. So many things influencing the student's understanding, of concepts, and so many parts of the brain is used that, we can connect all of this when we use concept checking questions. Don't you think that the more connections we can make in our brains, the more likely we are to remember and retain information? At the very least, it could help students' understanding of vocabulary and grammar, as opposed to, here is a picture, or here are the rules, do the exercises. Right, okay, let's take a closer look. I'm going to now refer to concept checking questions as CCQs, okay? Using them does take a little bit of, it's a skill. It takes time to learn how to do this properly, but it is very beneficial. Your students can get a clear understanding of a word or a concept, and they also get a full, rounded idea of the target language. It's very focused, it's very step-by-step and scaffolded. It helps the teacher and the learner to pinpoint problems. It confirms for learners that they've understood, which gives them confidence. Learners are involved and engaged because it's questions, they have to listen. And most importantly, you are not feeding any information to your students. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some examples of CCQs. It's a very scaffolding kind of approach, getting more complex as we go on. Okay, so I'm going to start with a nice, simple example. This example is the water is boiling. Okay, boiling is your key word. Now, just as you're listening, decide what this means and think about how you could check how the learners understand this. Now, I imagine you are thinking of words like very hot, 100 degrees, Possibly a picture, because it's the easiest, a picture of a boiling pan with carrots and things like that. But what questions can accompany that? So the examples that I'm using, I'm going to talk about in more detail afterwards, but I will tell you what kinds of questions they are, okay? So the first question you could ask is the water hot? Yes, this is a yes-no question. Is the water hot or cold? This is what I call a this or that question. You give the learner options. How hot? Very, or 100 degrees. So again, this is an information question. Students are applying their existing knowledge. What temperature? 100 degrees. Again, students are applying their existing knowledge with this information question. What do you cook in boiling water in your home? As above, information question. The answers will be more limited. Not just what can you boil, okay, because, you could pretty much boil anything, but limit it to a common experience, in your home. That makes a lot more sense. Can you put your finger in it? This is what we call a discrimination question. This checks function and register. What have you cooked in boiling water before? Life experience. Raise your hands if you've cooked rice before. Shared experience questions. So just with that really, really simple list, you've kind of covered everything there. Okay, here's another one. He managed to cross the river. So manage to do something. This is a little bit more complex. Arguably, a picture helps the concept of boiling water, but maybe a picture won't do the job on its own here for manage to do something. So again, think about it yourself. What does manage to do mean? Pause the recording and think about this one. Are you back? Okay, brilliant. So what it means is you are able to do something successfully, but it wasn't easy to do. Now, if this concept is tricky for you to put into words, think really carefully about how your students are going to understand it. So if you are going to use a picture, use something like a picture of somebody getting out of the water and climbing up a riverbank, looking a bit bedraggled, okay? So start with a yes-no question. Did he cross the river? Yes. Was it easy or difficult? Difficult. If you've still got a few blank faces, there's not a lot more you can say to really put the meaning across. So give some example sentences for context and ask the questions again. I woke up late this morning, but I managed to get to work on time. I woke up late this morning, but I managed to get to work on time. So build a story, build a concept. If you wake up late, how do you feel? Tired, stressed, okay? Life experience. What's the danger of getting up late? Students can use their existing knowledge or their past experience. You could be late for school, you could be late for work. Was the person in this example late? No. But was it easy to get to work on time? No. Why not? Why wasn't it easy to get to work? Okay, so this might depend on existing knowledge or experience or cultural knowledge. There might be more than one answer. For example, if punctuality is really important in a certain culture, they might answer this question by saying the time is very limited. You only have 10 minutes to get to work. If the country that you're teaching in has a terrible public transport service, their answer might be you could miss your bus, or there's heavy traffic, you could get stuck in it, or something like that. But make the example sentences relatable. So if you think about my first example about he managed to cross the river, who's ever going to do that, But if you think about waking up late this morning and managing to get to work on time, students can relate to that. And again, you can always change that to school if your students are young. Tailor the questions to your students' culture and experience and age. Can you think of another example sentence you would use to illustrate manage to with your students? If you'd like to know a little bit more detail about the kinds of questions that I've mentioned, there's a really good example of this using the word bedsit on teachingenglish.org.uk. The website address is in the show notes. And again, it gives you some nice, clear examples of yes-no questions, information questions, things like that. So focus on the concepts. Use clear, easy language. Avoid long questions and think about what answers you expect. It's a good idea to write the CCQs and the anticipated answers in your lesson plan. This is great practice, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Only use familiar language. Keep it as simple as possible. Even for those advanced students and advanced concepts, clarity and relatability is the way to go here. Yes, no questions, this or that questions, and simple WH, what, where, who, why questions are particularly effective. Use as many questions as possible to check various aspects of the language and to cover as many learners as possible. Is this too much? Am I offending my learners with all these questions? Well, ask yourself, isn't it worth covering too much ground rather than not enough? You're engaging them, you're asking them questions, you've got their attention, and it's scaffolded. What's not to love? Okay, so before you start writing your CCQs, ask yourself some questions. Number 1, what exactly does it mean? Use a dictionary if you have to, there's no shame in it. Number 2, how will you convey the meaning and check that the learners understand? So let's go back to ivory. How would you CCQ ivory? Okay, here are my ideas. Start with the picture. Where does ivory come from? Elephants. What colour is it? White. Where is it? Get a student to point to it. Now, relate to semantic and episodic memory here. How do people take ivory from elephants? Do they ask them nicely or do they kill them? What do they do with the ivory? They sell it. Why do people buy ivory? Or what do they make from ivory? Is it legal to sell or buy it in most countries? Why not? Okay, so we've talked about CCQs. Let's talk about ICQs. Instruction checking questions. You'll be delighted to hear that these are less complicated because we are dealing with concrete instructions. There's not a lot of grey area here, okay? But it is very easy to assume your students understand you. For example, you set up a reading task with instructions, turn to page 27, exercise A, and a number of things can happen. The students just stare at you, or they ask you about 3 minutes after everybody's started reading, "Teacher, what do I do?" Or they told you they didn't know what to do right at the end of the reading during the feedback phase. Or maybe you see a student nudge their neighbour and go, "What are we doing?" Or maybe they're just shuffling uncomfortably in their chair. Maybe they didn't understand. So think about, how did you administer your instructions? I'm sure you think you're using clear, concise language. You said the page number exercise clearly. You told them, read the text, answer the questions. How could they not understand that? Well, you'd be amazed. Now, we tend to do this more at higher levels, not using the ICQs when you're giving instructions because you just assume they'll understand, but you do still get called out. Some students, they don't hear you, they're not paying attention, they don't know what to do. So go back to basics. It sounds obvious, it might feel like you're insulting them, but your job is to make sure everyone is literally on the same page. So here's a tip. Ask students to look at you and not open their books until you've finished talking. Go to page 27, read exercise 1, read the introduction to the text. Then think about the answer and check your ideas with the person sitting opposite you. Now it's time to check. What page? 27. Great, now look at me. Which exercise? Exercise 1. All the text or just the introduction? Just the introduction. Who do you talk to? Or who do you talk to? The table or one person? One person. Which one? Next to or opposite you? Opposite you. Okay? They're all paying attention, they're all looking at you, they all understand. Something very similar you can do with a handout or a photocopy. Now, I've done this a million times. You put the handout on the table, their heads automatically go down. What do? They stop listening. Okay, so what you do is you keep the handout. Do not give it to them. You hold it up and you point to the section you want them to focus on. Give them the instructions. Exercise 1, read and answer the questions. Then hand it out. Tell them don't touch them, just keep your hands on the desk. And then ask them again, which exercise? What do you have to do? And again, if you're doing if you have cards for a game or you've got cards for some kind of matching exercise, same thing. Hold it up in front of you first. Who picks the first card? Student 1. Who is student 1? Raise your hand, student 1. Okay, what do they do next? What do you all do when student 1 picks a card? When student 1 is finished, what happens next? And that kind of thing. So give them the instructions and then questions. So just to recap, write these out in your lesson plans, ICQs and CCQs. It will take some time. Practice. Always put yourself in the student's shoes. Simplicity is key. Form concepts slowly and methodically. Tailor the examples to your students and make them as relatable as possible, especially if the source material you're working with isn't quite doing the job. And that's that. Hit subscribe on your podcast player and share this episode on your social media or with a colleague that you think will get something out of it. I wish you all a lovely week, and please do not forget to use the people around you for support and only do as much as you can do, no more. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Share the love, guys. Bye.